There is a country right now that is not firing a single missile. It has not deployed one soldier. It has not spent $1 on bombs, jets, or naval ships in this war. And yet, as the smoke rises over Tehran, as American and Israeli warplanes carry out strikes night after night, and as Iran fires back with everything it has, this country is sitting back, quietly watching, and getting richer and more powerful by the day. That country is Russia. And I want to tell you right now, what is happening in the Iran-Israel conflict is not just a Middle East story. It is one of the most calculated geopolitical plays we have seen in modern history. Russia did not start this war. Russia did not plan this war. But Russia, more than almost any other nation on Earth right now, is benefiting from it in ways that are going to shape the next decade of global power. Stay with me here, because this is deeper and more connected than most people realize. The bombs falling on Tehran are simultaneously helping fund a war in Ukraine. The oil prices spiking because of the Strait of Hormuz are filling Russian state accounts while draining American allies in Europe. And according to multiple U.S. officials, confirmed by the Washington Post, NBC News, CBS News, and CNN, Russia is not just watching this war from the sidelines. Russia has reportedly been sharing satellite intelligence with Iran about the locations of American warships and aircraft in the Middle East. This is not speculation. This is not a fringe report. This is confirmed by a senior U.S. official with direct knowledge speaking to CBS News. And what makes it even more extraordinary is the reaction from the Trump administration. When a reporter asked President Trump about it at a White House event, he called the question stupid. That response tells you something very important about how complex and uncomfortable this situation really is. Welcome to Unlocked History Hub. I am going to break all of this down for you today. The money, the intelligence, the chess moves, the global consequences. And I am going to give you my honest opinion on what I think this all means. Because the truth is, nobody is covering this story the way it deserves to be covered. So if you are the kind of person who wants to actually understand what is happening in the world, not just hear that something happened, you are in the right place. Hit that like button right now, and if you are not already subscribed to Unlocked History Hub, subscribe right now. Every single week, this channel is committed to giving you the real picture, the connections that the headlines miss, and the analysis that makes sense of a world that often seems completely out of control. Now let's get into it. To understand why Russia is winning this war without fighting in it, you have to go back a few years and understand a relationship that most people in the West did not pay close enough attention to. Russia and Iran have been building a very serious military partnership since at least 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. At that point, Russia needed drones, and Iran had them. Iran supplied Russia with thousands of Shahed attack drones, which Russia has used relentlessly to strike Ukrainian cities, power plants, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure. Iran also helped Russia set up an entire drone manufacturing facility inside Russian territory to produce Iranian-designed drones domestically at scale. And in return, Russia supplied Iran with S-300 air defense systems, sophisticated radar jamming technology called the Krasuka, and, according to multiple analysts, valuable intelligence and technical knowledge gained from 4 years of intensive modern warfare in Ukraine. This partnership was military, it was economic, and it was strategic. Both countries shared something important. They were both under heavy American sanctions, both locked out of major Western financial systems, and both deeply motivated to challenge the global dominance of the United States. So when the U.S. and Israel launched joint airstrikes on Iran on February 28, 2026, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and triggering the biggest Middle East conflict in a generation, Russia did not break that partnership. It expanded it. Here is what U.S. intelligence now says happened. Since the war began, Russia has been passing Iran detailed satellite imagery showing the locations of American warships, aircraft, radar installations, and communication systems across the Middle East. One U.S. official described Russia's effort as, and I am paraphrasing because these were sourced words, a pretty comprehensive operation. Iran, for all its military capabilities, has a relatively small and limited satellite network. Russia has a much more sophisticated constellation of intelligence-gathering satellites. By sharing that data with Tehran, Russia effectively gave Iran targeting information it could not have gathered on its own. And it is no coincidence that several Iranian drone and missile strikes in the early days of this war hit locations where U.S. troops and assets were present. In Kuwait, an Iranian drone struck a makeshift facility housing American troops, killing 6 U.S. service members. The attack was so precise that a U.S. Army Central Command memo noted that Iranian intelligence had likely been monitoring the movements of those troops before the strike. Satellite imagery from Russia filled that gap. Now you might be wondering, why would Russia do this? Is Russia not simultaneously talking peace with the United States over Ukraine? Is Russia not trying to stay on good terms with the Trump administration? And this is where I think the real strategic genius of Russia's position becomes clear, and honestly, where my own opinion comes in strongly. Russia is playing both sides of this board at the same time, and it is doing so with remarkable precision. On one hand, Russia condemned the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. Putin publicly called the killing of Khamenei a cynical murder. Russia's foreign ministry called the attack a pre-planned and unprovoked act of armed aggression. That rhetoric keeps Moscow aligned with the global South, with countries like China, and with the narrative that the U.S.-led West is a rogue actor. On the other hand, Russia never deployed troops, never fired a missile in Iran's defense, never actually crossed a line that would bring it into direct conflict with the United States. It helped Iran just enough to keep the war painful and prolonged for the Americans, but not so much that Trump would have to publicly respond in a way that blows up the ongoing Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations. This is one of the most sophisticated geopolitical balancing acts I have seen in years. Russia gets to hurt America without fighting America. It gets to support Iran without committing to Iran. And the whole time, it is collecting an enormous economic windfall from the single most powerful consequence of this war, the price of oil. Let me walk you through the money, because this is where the impact on ordinary people worldwide becomes crystal clear. Before the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran began on February 28th, crude oil was trading at somewhere between $68 and $72 a barrel. That was a manageable number. Then the war started. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow 21-mile waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply flows every single day, came under Iranian threat. Iran struck shipping vessels in the strait, effectively slowing oil and gas flows to a near standstill in the critical first days of the conflict. Oil prices blew past $80, then $90. Then on Monday, March 3rd, oil crossed $100 a barrel for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. For Russia, this was like winning the lottery. Analysts at CNBC confirmed this. Eurasia Group's energy director said Russia had already hugely benefited after Washington granted India a temporary waiver, allowing it to keep buying Russian crude. Before the Iran war, Russia was selling its Urals crude at a discount of $10 to $13 a barrel because of sanctions enforcement. By March 9th, Russian crude was selling at a premium of $4 to $5 above market, meaning in the space of 1 week, Russia's per-barrel revenue swung by roughly $15 to $18 on every single barrel it exports. Russia exports roughly 7 to 8 million barrels of oil per day. You do the math. That is an extra $100 million or more flowing into Russian state coffers every single day. Every single day this war continues, Russia makes more money. And here's the part that I think is absolutely critical to understand, and that most people are completely missing. That money is not sitting in a bank account somewhere collecting interest. That money is paying for Russian missiles, Russian drones, Russian soldiers, and Russian military operations in Ukraine. The European Union Council President Antonio Costa said it plainly in a speech to EU ambassadors in Brussels, and I want to give you the substance of what he said because it is striking. He said there is so far only one winner in this war, and that winner is Russia. It gains new resources to finance its war against Ukraine as energy prices rise. It profits from the diversion of military capabilities that could otherwise support Ukraine. And it benefits from the global attention shifting away from Ukraine's front lines. That is an EU leader, not a Russian propagandist, saying that this war in the Middle East is directly helping fund the war in Eastern Europe. And the diversion of military resources is real. Ukraine was already desperately short of American-made Patriot air defense missiles before this war started. Those missiles cost around $4 million each. The United States has now been firing enormous quantities of air defense munitions in the Middle East, intercepting Iranian ballistic missiles and drones over Israel, Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and Kuwait. Every Patriot interceptor fired over the Persian Gulf is one less interceptor available for shipment to Kyiv. Every advanced munition spent in Operation Epic Fury, that is what the Trump administration named this military campaign, is one less available for Ukraine's defense. Russia understands this perfectly. A prolonged war in the Middle East does not just make Russia richer. It makes Russia's military position in Ukraine stronger, because it strains and depletes the arsenals of Russia's primary adversary. Let me now zoom out and talk about what all of this is doing to the rest of the world, because I think the global consequences of this conflict are being dramatically undercovered, and people deserve to understand how directly this touches their lives. South Korea's Kospi stock market suffered its worst crash since the 2008 global financial crisis, dropping as much as 12% in a single day, triggering automatic trading halts. Japan's stock market fell sharply. European markets were rattled. Why? Because Asian economies run on Gulf oil. China imports approximately half of its total energy needs from the Persian Gulf region. Japan and South Korea import the vast majority of theirs. When the Strait of Hormuz slows, the economic bloodstream of the entire Pacific runs cold. Gas prices in the United States hit an 11-month high. The Philippines introduced a 4-day work week specifically because of the fuel crisis linked to this conflict. That is not a small disruption. That is a government telling its people to work less because they literally cannot afford to power the economy at full speed. India's rice exports, 400,000 metric tons of basmati rice, are stuck at ports because war-related disruptions have frozen the shipping lanes those cargo ships normally use. Egypt's president declared a near-economic emergency. Djibouti warned of severe consequences for developing nations that depend on maritime trade. The IMF was already projecting global growth of 3.3% for 2026, and that number is now being revised downward. Goldman Sachs warned that sustained oil prices at current levels could push U.S. consumer inflation back above 3%, making Federal Reserve interest rate cuts almost impossible for the foreseeable future. All of this, every one of these consequences, runs through Russia's benefit column. Higher global inflation weakens American consumer confidence and pressures the Federal Reserve. European economies strained by energy costs are less capable of funding Ukraine. Developing nations destabilized by oil price shocks have less political bandwidth to apply diplomatic pressure on Russia. The interconnection of all these factors is not accidental. It is the predictable result of a global energy system that is deeply vulnerable to exactly this kind of conflict. And Russia, as one of the world's largest oil producers, is always positioned to benefit when that vulnerability is exposed. Now let me give you my honest assessment of what Russia's strategy actually is, because I think it is more nuanced than either Russia is helping Iran or Russia is staying neutral. Russia is doing something much more calculated. It is maintaining strategic ambiguity. It is helping Iran just enough to make the war more costly and prolonged for the United States, bleeding American munitions, diverting American attention, and exhausting American political will. But it is doing this through intelligence sharing, which is low profile and deniable, rather than through weapons transfers or direct military involvement, which would be impossible to explain to the Trump administration during active peace negotiations over Ukraine. The fact that Trump dismissed questions about Russian intelligence sharing as stupid is, I would argue, not just bluster. It reveals a real political problem. If Trump publicly confirms and strongly condemns Russia's role in helping Iran target American troops, he potentially blows up the Ukraine peace process he has staked enormous personal credibility on. If he ignores it, he risks looking weak on Iran and weak with his own base. Russia has essentially maneuvered the United States into a position where acknowledging the truth is politically costly. That is a form of leverage. And Vladimir Putin, whatever else you think of him, is very good at creating leverage. Meanwhile, the EU's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas said something I think deserves a moment of attention. She noted that Ukraine, the country Russia is actively bombing, has been sharing its expertise in countering Iranian Shahed drones with American and Gulf allies because Ukraine has more experience fighting those specific weapons than anyone else on Earth. Think about that. Ukraine is helping American forces defend against the exact drones that Russia encouraged Iran to fire. The Russia-Iran partnership built on Ukraine's suffering is now being partly countered by Ukrainian knowledge shared with American forces. The circularity of that is almost difficult to process. Here is where I land after looking at all of this. Russia is not the mastermind of this war. Putin did not sit in the Kremlin and plot the assassination of Khamenei or the American decision to launch airstrikes. But Russia had the wisdom, or the cold calculation, to position itself in a way that allowed it to benefit enormously from a conflict it did not start. It banked on its relationship with Iran. It banked on the vulnerability of global oil markets. It banked on the fact that American military resources are finite and that every front the U.S. opens drains capacity from every other front. And so far, every one of those bets is paying off. The European Union is right to be alarmed. The nations funding Ukraine's defense are now watching their energy bills rise, their economic growth projections fall, and their political attention fragments between Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Russia can afford a long war in Ukraine precisely because it has the oil revenues to sustain it. And right now, the Iran war is turbocharging those revenues while simultaneously reducing the flow of American weapons to the front lines in Ukraine. I do not say any of this to suggest the United States or Israel made the wrong decisions. That is a genuinely complex debate with legitimate perspectives on multiple sides, and I will not pretend it is simple. What I am saying is that geopolitics does not reward naivety. When you remove the world's biggest regional bully from the chessboard, which is arguably what killing Khamenei accomplished, you also open space for other players to move. And right now, the player moving fastest and most deliberately into that space is not China, not Turkey, not the Gulf states. It is Russia. Quietly, invisibly, and profitably. The world is more connected than most people appreciate on a daily basis. A missile fired over Tehran raises the price of gas in Ohio. A decision to close the Strait of Hormuz crashes a stock market in Seoul. Russian satellite imagery shared with Iranian commanders may have helped guide a drone that killed American soldiers in Kuwait. These are not separate stories. They are one story about a global system under pressure and about who has positioned themselves to benefit when that system shakes. I want to know what you think about this, because this is exactly the kind of conversation I started this channel to have. Do you think Russia is playing a brilliant hand, or do you think this strategy will eventually backfire? Do you think the United States is underestimating how much Russia is gaining from this conflict? And what do you think the right response is? From Washington, from Europe, from the rest of the world? Drop your answer in the comments below. Be specific, because the best comments on this channel are the ones that actually make me think differently about something. And if this video gave you something real to chew on, something beyond the usual headlines, share it with one person today. Not because it helps my numbers, though it does, but because these conversations need to be happening in more living rooms, more break rooms, and more dinner tables across this country. The more people who actually understand what is happening, not just that something is happening, the better all of us are. Stay sharp, stay curious, and I will see you in the next one on Unlocked History Hub.